I don't cycle for sport. I don't often cycle recreationally. I mean, there's a component of recreation to any riding that you do.
Welcome to Tell Me About Your Bike, the podcast about the meaning of life, the universe, and cycling. I'm your host, Wesley Cheney. In this episode, we'll be talking to Logan, the founder of Norfolk Bike Commuter, about the magic of folding bikes. Find out where he stands on the helmet question, what his unicorn bike is, and his plans to bike in Rome on honeymoon. My podcast is Tell Me About Your Bike.
Okay.
It's about biking, the universe, and everything. So I just like to talk to people and get stories about their experiences with their bikes. And so, how about you give me an introduction and tell me about your favorite bike right now?
Yeah. Well,
what's your name for us?
My name's Logan.
Okay.
I'm a resident here in Norfolk. I founded Norfolk Bike Commuter, which is a nonprofit that promotes cycling as transportation, specifically here in Norfolk. And, where to start with the bikes? Well, my bikes, I mentioned this to you when we started chatting, but I love folding bikes.
Right. I've had a folder, so.
Gotta love the folders. My main folder right now is a Dahan Glide, which is an older model. I think it was manufactured in either 2011 or 2012.
Right.
But it's really kind of fascinating for a folder. 24-inch wheels, a very low step-through frame.
Right.
Slightly swept back handlebars, internal 8-speed
hub
in the back. Very clean, beautiful copper color, silver accents. And I describe it to my friends and my family as the Cadillac of folding bikes.
Right.
It's actually not all that convenient as a folder.
Right.
And so it's sort of on the opposite of the spectrum of something like a Brompton.
Right.
Where it's a briefcase with wheels.
Right.
And then you've got your typical middle ground, which is your 20-inch wheel folding bikes. This one, it's more like a bike that can fold if you wanted it to, but you're better off if you don't.
Yeah. That's the way my Peugeot was. It could fold, and so I could pack it into a box to ship it to Alaska to ride around town in Skagway.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the most practical of bikes, and I ultimately left it in Skagway and was just like, well, here, you ride it. I can't ride it anymore, and I'm not shipping it out here.
And that's the nice thing about bikes, too. I think there is an element of kind of like a good book.
Right.
You don't hang on to it too long. You don't covet it. If you put it up on a shelf, it's just going to gather dust. But if you give it to perhaps somebody you care about or the person who needs it at the time, that's where the magic starts happening. I'm trying to think of how many bikes I've given away. Probably not too many, but a handful. Yeah. Handful of bikes.
I've done the same. Which was kind of how I looked at it when I was passing the bike on to other folks, because the summer workers would always be coming up and be looking for cheap bikes. Mm-hmm. So I knew I was just passing it into the community, and someone else was going to ride it, but didn't end up being the best bike for me at the time. But it was a good bike to have, and I flew from Norfolk to Juneau, and then took the bike out of the box and strapped all my backpacks onto it, and then rode it to the ferry to ride and go 100 miles. There was this mountain pass called the White Pass, and it was the way into the Yukon goldfields. And so there was a 2-lane paved road up the mountain pass, which was 13 miles from sea level to 3,280 feet, I think. Mm-hmm. When I went with the folder, my goal had been to actually ride it up the White Pass. What I neglected to say, I was there as a professional bicycle tour guide.
Oh, okay.
I was working the summer, taking people to the top of the White Pass on mountain bikes, and then basically just coasting downhill for 13 miles to sea level. There was like a mile of actual pedaling involved. which some people failed abysmally. I felt sorry for them, but but it turned out the Peugeot folder was with these oddball 18-inch wheels, and it only had 5 gears on it. It was no match.
Not up to the task.
It was not up to the task. I got onto it, and I could feel the bike twisting underneath of me as I was trying to pedal up the hill. No, and I decided I really didn't want to try descending anymore.
That is, so one thing I've found with my folding bikes, and I've had a few at this point, and there's some that I prefer and some that I don't, is you do have a lot more body flex, because typically you're dealing with a folding design that kind of comes to one point in the frame, and that's your critical point. And so if you start loading up the bike in different ways, especially if you, as I often do, have it loaded down with groceries or something, like something that I've put on the back, you start to reach a certain weight threshold where you can feel it going back and forth. And it's totally within spec. The bike can handle it. Yeah. But you start feeling a little iffy. And some are better than others. I've actually been looking into some sort of heavier duty folding bikes as I look forward to. What
are some of those? What's your unicorn bike right now? The bike that you're lusting after.
Gosh, that one's going to take a minute to think about. For a long time, since I started riding folding bikes, and I started riding folding bikes back in, not too long ago actually, it was back in the summer of 2022. I was living in St. Augustine. Okay. And I was getting more interested in folding bikes, and I was commuting to and from work every day. It was about a 5-mile ride. It's Florida, so it's flat. Right. Not particularly troublesome as far as the ride is concerned. But when I'd moved down there, I bought an old AMF 3-speed bike off of Marketplace for something like $80. Right. And that was fine, but it was heavy. It was a bit cumbersome. And when it would rain, and it rained fairly frequently in Florida, a little bit harder to throw in the back of someone's car and go, hey, man, can you give me a ride? Right. So the first folding bike that I dailied was from a brand called Zizzo. Okay. It used to be called the Euro bike. Zizzo.
Oh, Zizzo. Okay.
Zizzo. And as far as where they stand in the market, they're on the bottom end of the named brands. So you have, of course, the generic, plain, no branding bicycles that maybe you can find on Amazon or Alibaba or something. But Zizzo, at least as far as price point, is on the lower end. What really made the bike so appealing to me was that quality didn't seem to suffer for that. It was a good bike with good equipment. Okay. You know, Shimano shifting equipment. Again, not top of the line. It was attorney, right?
It's Shimano. If it's as long as it isn't the bottom of the line Shimano that they use for Walmart bikes, you're okay.
Yeah, and it was quite good. And it was quite reliable, and convenient, comfortable. And I thought, wow, I really like this. I enjoy this. So I bought another one. Right. That one I'd actually bought used off of Marketplace, but I bought another one straight from them. Okay. And over the course of 2022, started communicating more with Zizzo and started actually giving them product feedback and saying, well, this is a modification that I found very useful. And this is something that I found lacking. And they loved that dialogue. They were, excuse me, there's their primary tech is a guy named Tony. They're based out in California somewhere. It escapes me at the moment. But Tony and I would talk, and I was really excited because around the beginning of 2023, they started taking some of my advice to heart and started doing modifications to some of the bikes. So, for instance, I had really lamented the lack of a pig nose adapter on the front of the bike. Do you know what that is?
No. Tell me what that would be.
I've really only ever seen them on folding bikes, but they're a threaded piece of metal at the very front of the bike, right on the. Gosh, no, I'm messing up my.
The fork?
No, not right above the fork.
Right above the fork.
Yeah, the head tube. Okay. I guess that would be the head tube. Yeah. I feel bad for being a former bike mechanic and failing at bicycle anatomy.
No worries.
But and saying so often. But there's this threaded portion where you can attach racks to.
Oh, it's
a hard point. Yeah. It's a rack mount. or it can be a rack mount. You know,
Right.
you can put baskets there, you can put attachments there,
Right.
you can whatever you want to put there. But what's so nice is that it's not weight that's going onto the wheels directly. It's on
Right.
the frame, so
Right.
it's sturdier, and your weight balance isn't thrown off nearly as
Yeah,
much.
yeah,
And I was saying, hey, you know, I really wished that this model of bike you have
yeah.
had this pig nose.
Right.
And I found out that because the folding bike market is a little more prevalent in Southeast Asia,
Right.
in Southeast Asia, they were selling these pig nose adapters.
Oh.
And sure enough, Tony gets back to me and he says, you know, we were thinking about this too. It's
Yeah.
good that you gave us this feedback.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
So I felt very good about that. Zizzo is a brand that I would recommend to anyone if they
Okay.
wanted to get their feet wet with
Yeah.
a good folding bike. I think they don't pay me to say this, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate because they should. But their bikes range anywhere from $300 to, I think, just shy of $600 new.
Okay.
And
That's
it's
not
an exemplary
Yeah.
product that I'd go back to. So right now, you asked about the unicorn bike. It's not
Yeah.
much of a unicorn, really, but they have a model called the Forte.
Okay.
All of their other folding bikes have a rated gross weight of 240 pounds.
Okay.
The Forte has some additional welds and pieces of metal on the
Right.
frame. I think it uses heavier gauge spokes for the wheels
Okay.
that allow it to hold up to 300 pounds.
Ah.
And that to me is a little more appealing because as I've found on my previous bikes and I've found with my current bike,
Right.
I'm probably going to be carrying more weight. I mean,
Right.
I'm not the biggest guy in the world. I
Right.
weigh about 170 to 180
Yeah.
pounds depending on the
I got
season.
100 pounds on it.
And I'm sure you're not selling it, you know.
No.
But, you know, I'm just thinking forward to the future, thinking of carrying lots of groceries and
Right.
such, and thinking of maybe putting a kid on the back one of these days
Yeah.
and thinking, my kid, that would be. I'm not just going
Yeah.
to take one off the street. But
No. George Santos would be able to tell you where to get a baby if you needed one. So. It's an old joke, folks. George Santos, by the time this podcast come out, will have been
yesterday's
relegated.
papers. Yeah.
Maybe he'll be on trial at that point in time.
We'll see. But I don't know. I'll call up my Hollywood contacts, see if they have any babies they can send me. But I've been looking at that because the cargo bike, and specifically the electric cargo bike market, it's so tantalizing.
Right.
You know, you see what's coming out of Turn especially,
Yeah.
or Adventon, or whatever brand it is, and you go, oh, God, that's sexy, or I want that.
Right.
And I start thinking more and more, and I go, do I need it?
Right.
Do I really need it? Do I need to spend $3,000 to $6,000 on a bicycle that, mind you, I'd probably get my money's worth?
Yeah.
I make all the economic arguments all the time, but do I need it? And for me, the answer is probably no. The answer is more likely I can adapt a $500, $600 bicycle just as well to suit my particular needs and my riding proclivities.
Right.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
So someone else is going to have to drop 6 G's on the nice semi-folding electric cargo bikes, but I don't think it's going to be me. There is one other unicorn bike, actually.
What's that?
I'll mention it. There's a Spanish brand. I don't even know if they're still in business, and it's a shame. But it's called the, is it Bib? It's either Bibo or Biba. I think it's Bib, B-I-B-A or B-I-B-O. I don't remember off the top of my head. But it's a Spanish company who makes or made a cargo bike, 20-inch wheels, a wonderful frame design.
Right.
Because you don't have different lattices of triangles going all over the place. You have one consistent tube. Okay. And that's sort of the main structural motif of the bike, if you want to put it that way. And then you have all of your supports for your rear wheels, and then your front fork is pretty standard. But it's a beautiful looking bike, and it seemed immensely practical. Right. And you had hard points in the back and in the front of the bike. Right. That would make it great as a cargo bike. Right. So I reached out to them. I think it was back in spring of last year. Right. I never got a response. Right. It was basically, hi, I'm in the United States. Right. Do you still exist? Do you still make this bike? Right. How could I get my hands on one? Do you license them here? Who do I need to talk to? Who is the guy? And I never received a response. So maybe I should have thrown it into Google Translate first and sent it in Spanish, or or I don't know, but that's the other one. Is the I believe is the Bibba bike.
Bibba. All right, I'll be doing some research on that. I'll find it, and we'll post some pictures on the Instagram account for Tell Me About Your Bike with some pictures.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So sweet. All right, let's see what we got on the list.
What else?
What bike did you ride here today?
I rode the Dayhan.
The Dayhan.
Yeah.
How many speeds on that one?
8.
8 with the internally geared hub?
Internally geared hub, yeah. I love that thing. It's skipped on me a few times.
And what size are the wheels?
I kind of worry for it. 24.
24
on that one. So the ride, I do like the 20-inch wheel bikes. You kind of feel like you can flick them around.
Right.
They have that shorter wheelbase typically, and so if you're not used to it, it can be a little squirrely. But once you get comfortable with it, I think it's perfectly fine for any sort of road riding. But this has 24, so that's why I call it a Cadillac. I mean, it just kind of rolls over everything. It's got a suspension seat post. It's just really comfortable.
My daily rider is a 29er with the fattest slick tires I can get on it.
Yeah.
Big Apples. And that rolls over everything. So it's a rigid bike, but I love it. And so I'm hoping to do an enduro ride on it this summer coming up. So
yeah. Well, the big thing with me is, and maybe this is why I've picked the niche of riding that I have, is cycling was really never a hobby for me. I don't think that it is today. So I don't cycle for sport. I don't often cycle recreationally. I mean, there's a component of recreation to any riding that you do. But for me, it really is like a car, and an economy car at that, where it's for getting from point A to point B, and I use it in a very practical sense. You know, I drive a Mitsubishi Mirage, and it's small and it's silver, and I call it the brave little toaster.
Right.
But I have a sort of appliance view of my bikes, and one of the reasons I started Norfolk Bike Commuter was to very specifically advocate for that cycling as transportation component, where you don't have to be, and this isn't derogatory in any way, but you don't have to be someone for whom the bike is a significant or even somewhat part of their identity, who loves the bike culture, who is keeping on top of the latest in cycling technology or in trends or in races or whatever it is.
Right.
I'm not trying to appeal to that person.
Right.
Largely because I'm not that person.
Right.
And kudos to everyone who is, I should say. I should work on my English.
It's all right.
But I'm on a different vibe, a different speed.
No, and that's my target audience with the podcast is people who are interested in their bike as a part of their lifestyle, as opposed to people who are like, well, what's the next Tour de France going to be, and which teams are in it, and who's competing, and who won.
Well, and the overlap is big, right? I mean, it's not an exclusionary thing like, oh, if you wear Lycra shorts, I don't want to spend time with you. That's not it at all. Yeah. It's just different strokes for different folks, as it were.
We can talk about that. Yeah, sure. So what's the attraction to floating bikes?
The attraction for me is the flexibility.
Right.
Again, because I use the bike as a means of transportation more often than not.
Right.
But, speaking of that distinction between practicality and recreation, this comes in handy for recreation too.
Right.
You can take the folding bike with you.
Right.
Where you want to go, wherever you want to go.
Right.
And now you have a bicycle. Whereas with a more standard rigid frame bike, there's a little bit more that goes into it. You need to throw the rack on the car or whatever it is. It's just a larger package typically, and the dimensions are such that it can throw you off a little bit.
Right.
So for me, that element of practicality was what made it. And it's also what makes 20-inch kind of more standard mid-frame folding bikes more appealing to me, is that I am a daily multimodal commuter.
Right.
But I'm not taking my bike to, say, a train station.
Right.
Hopping on a train with the bike folded up, immediately wanting to unfold it and then carry on. Those types of bikes, whether it's Brompton, whether it's, what is Dayhan called their smaller wheeled models? They have a few different ones where it's a 16-inch wheel, or some are ridiculous, like 14-inch wheels. But they fold into themselves very neatly.
Right.
And I didn't need that particular of a folding bike, because every time you make a design decision, and as an engineer, I deal with this every day.
Right.
Every time you make a design decision, or you want to emphasize a part of a design, you're making a compromise somewhere else.
Right.
It's this tension. It's this universal tension that exists.
And when that tension is balanced well, you end up with products like the Brompton.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where it does what it says it's going to do in a very compact size.
But what you lose with something like the Brompton is you lose some of that carrying capacity, and you lose some of the rigidity, and you lose the comfort of having bigger wheels. Those are the design compromises, but it gives you exactly what you want from it.
Yeah.
So for me, having, especially with the 20-inch bikes or 20-inch wheel bikes, having a package that can fold up neatly.
Yeah.
It's not the smallest thing in the world, and it's also not the smoothest fold in the world on occasion.
Right.
But it can do it, and it can do it in less than a minute without you either having to take out a mortgage or take out the tool bag.
Right. And that's on your Dayhan?
That's on the Dayhan. That's on the Zizzos. That's on any sort of mid-frame folding bike.
Right.
The fold is not going to be the most beautiful thing in the world.
Right.
But it's going to work.
Right.
And so let me give you a case study.
Yeah.
I ride my bike from my house to the bus stop. I don't have to fold up the bike to get onto the bus. I just throw it on the front rack. Thank you, HRT.
Right.
And I take that to work, and then I take it off the rack when I get to the bus stop closest to work.
Right.
I ride a couple miles up to my office. But let's say on the way back, my fiance and I have plans for the evening or something like that.
Right.
She can pick me up at the bus stop, and I very casually just fold up the bike, put it in the back.
Right.
Casual, we're done. Or another thing I've done in the past is we've gone, and this is sort of a general example because I've done it with a lot of people, but let's say you wanted to take a trip up to Colonial Williamsburg.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to deal with parking.
Yeah.
At least not in the city proper, the downtown proper. You park just a little outside. You take the bikes out of the trunk.
Right.
And now you're cruising. I've done the same thing when I've gone camping. It's just you have them there. They're extremely convenient. And they offer a level of rideability and flexibility that I don't think you can match with a standard rigid frame bike.
Right.
And I love that about them. And so that's probably the main reason why I love folding bikes.
So what's your favorite trip you've taken with a folding bike?
Yeah. Well, again, not to beat a dead horse here because I've made this point a couple times, but I'm not a big trip rider. I think there's a better way to say that, but I'm not going to say that I won't, but I haven't gone bike packing before.
Right.
I haven't done these long rides. I hear of people go, oh, I did 15 miles, I did 20 miles, I did 25 miles, and I go, didn't your butt hurt?
Yeah.
Because it's not my thing, and it hasn't been my thing before.
Right.
So when I think of trips, I think either of places I've been to where I've taken the bikes, or I just think of my daily commutes. In retrospect,
Yeah, well, it could be. I mean, like one of my favorite rides is over the Jordan Bridge.
Oh, God, I've done that before. I did that with social cycling.
Yeah.
And I did that on the Dayhan, as a matter of fact. Once. It was one of their Casual Plus rides. It was cool. It was a cool experience. We rode. My now fiance was with me. My mom was with me. She didn't enjoy the ride because I suppose Casual Plus wasn't quite what she thought. She saw the Casual, and we saw the Plus, and it's like, oh, well, that shouldn't be too bad. And the pace was a little bit much for her. It was a little ambitious, although she did keep up with it. 69 years old. Don't hold her down. But when we got to the Jordan Bridge, this is admission time.
Yeah.
I am afraid of heights.
Oh, all right.
And I was the caboose for the ride, so I was kind of bringing up the rear, making sure people in the back were fine. And it was sort of funny to me coming up to someone, maybe they're having an issue with their derailleur or something, And I go, "Oh, are you okay?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's just fine. I'm just getting this back on the sprocket or whatever it was."
Right.
And they kind of look at me and they go, "Are you okay?" Because at the top of that bridge, I was having a little bit of a freak out. It's like, "Hey, all right, we've got the group picture. Let's start going.
Out.
Let's go. Let's get to Portsmouth. Let's get to the ferry." But yeah, those rides are nice.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of the rides that I find most enjoyable. I remember I actually started Norfolk Bike Commuter after riding to a job interview.
Uh-huh.
It was a job interview for a position at Hilton on the Main. And it was a beautiful day back in March of last year.
Right.
I was on one of the folders. I think I was on one of my Zizzos. And riding through Jeff Robertson Park on the ERT. And just taking it all in. And I'm wearing a suit.
Right.
And I'm on the bike. And all the flowers are in bloom. And the temperature is perfect. And I'm thinking to myself, I almost feel distracted trying to take all of this in. It was just a very sort of serene moment. And I loved that. So that's always nice. Those are some of my favorite rides. I love rides where I'm testing out a new way to carry stuff with the bike.
Right.
So another example of that is I had purchased a bike trailer.
Right.
And I was curious
Good
to see.
choice.
Very practical tool for anyone who's thinking of it. I would, before you go, again, spending a lot of money on what certainly is probably a very good cargo bike, look into getting a trailer because it may suit your needs just fine for a tenth of the price.
I have a Bob that I've had for 20 years now, and it just keeps rolling. And I love that thing. I love that thing.
So I had my Civic League. I'm in Park Place.
Right.
So shout out to the Park Place Civic League.
Right.
But last summer we had a barbecue that was hosted at someone's house somewhere else in the neighborhood. And I brought my grill.
Right.
I have this Weber grill because we were cooking up meat and whatever it was. And originally we had driven it over.
Right.
And I just bought the trailer, and I thought, I wonder if I can fit the grill in the trailer.
Oh.
And I could. It took 3 trips. I mean, we're only talking, 4 or 5 blocks here.
Right.
And it took 3 trips. But I was impressed with the fact that it fit as well as it did for one. It was almost like the trailer was built to the size of this grill.
I was thinking that,
And I have pictures of it up on the Instagram. But I just remember doing that and feeling a sense of accomplishment with it. Like, oh, wow, this is really cool. I got to do this. So those, for me, are the rides that I look back on and go, that was wonderful. I loved that. Even if I'm not doing like 15, 20 miles or whatever it is.
Cool, dude.
And
what's your dream ride on a folder?
What is my dream ride on a folder? Dream ride on a folder. I have to think about that one a little bit more too. For me, one of the most appealing aspects of cycling is the social aspect to it.
Yeah.
It really is a shame that social cycling beat so many people to that name because it's such a great name.
Yeah.
I love when I get to share it.
Right.
The folders specifically, again, because of how much joy I find in the way that they work and the usefulness that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my dream ride on a folder, it's not even in a place, it's not even in a time. It's, what if I just had like a bunch of folding bikes and somebody, I was with a group of people and they said, oh, if only we could get around on bikes. And then I just sort of magnificently pop out these folding bikes like, did you say bikes? And I think that for me would be the dream, where I can just produce a bunch of folding bikes and we take off cruising. I'm going to be doing some travel later this year, so folding bikes in wherever these places that I wind up going. I've mentioned my fiance a few times. We're planning on getting married this year in May and having our honeymoon not too long after that. And we're looking at Italy for the honeymoon. And so I think it would be very cool to roll up to something like that. Yeah. Be the super tourist rolling up to the Colosseum or going to, say, the Vatican and rolling up in a Zizzo. I think that'd be, at the very least, that would be good marketing. They really should pay me. But I think that would be a lot of fun, too.
I rode my bike through Rome, so...
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because that sounds like fun.
Oh, Well, I was camping and biking across Europe. I went from, when I was 19, I went from London to Rome on my bike by myself. And I was camping along the way, and so when I got to Rome, I camped in the suburbs at a campground, and then would take the bus into Rome. So I didn't. So for the most part, I was exploring Rome on foot and with the bus, and then I ended up riding in and to get to the train station to go to Vienna. Mm-hmm. So that was it was pretty chaotic on a bike for me then. Mm-hmm. And this would have been in 1994.
Okay.
So I expect that things have changed for the better in Rome. I would think that it would be even easier to get around on a bike now than it was then. And then it wasn't. It was not knowing the city and trying to navigate was a challenge.
And that's well before the smartphone revolution. You can't
right.
just pull up Google Maps on your phone and go, how do I get from
I was
here to
looking
here?
at the map from McDonald's and trying to the foot map from McDonald's and trying to figure out how to get across Rome. Or in my book Let's Go Europe, I had the Rome chapter all highlighted, and
there is a sense of adventure there that we miss out on now.
There is.
But yeah, I'm sure at the time you would have thought, oh man, do you have something in your pocket that can just lay it out for you? Well, that'll save me another 4 hours.
What I thought then, and there was somebody had I can remember I met this guy at the Vatican. He was trying to pick me up outside St. Peter's in the colonnade under the columns, and he had a book with a picture. It would have a picture of what it looks like now in Rome, and then it had a plastic layover where it would show you what it looked like then.
Yeah.
So you would look at this bunch of broken columns and crap on the floor, on the ground, and then it would open up and be like, oh, that's the temple to Jupiter. And so, that's what the Colosseum looked like before. Yeah. Because the reason the Colosseum looks the way it does, I learned this when I don't remember what spurred me on to reading this, but I learned this on the internet, was that it's actually built on a fault line. Mm-hmm. And so 2/3 of it is built on solid rock, and then the other third is built on marshy ground. And so when the earthquake hit, the marshy ground side fell down. And so originally it was just a pile of rubble, and so everybody was just mining the rubble to build their own buildings. And so that's where it's gone. So now that's the reason it looks the way it looks.
Fascinating, yeah.
I barely learned that, but yeah.
And I guess that also. So
what I always thought then, and I think now, is that it would be amazing to get to the point where you could actually take the Meta VR goggles and put them on and see, particularly in Pompeii, see the buildings as they are now with the digital overlay of what they looked like then.
Yeah, no,
that would be so
incredible.
Amazing, and just being able to just turn your head and see the road that you're standing on and what it looked like then. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, that'd really be something.
Yeah.
It's also funny that you said that. It hadn't occurred to me that there are probably little bits of the Colosseum in random buildings throughout Rome.
Yeah,
if that's
the reminder to myself. What was the last podcast you listened to?
What was the last podcast I listened to?
I always include a podcast recommendation in my podcast. So,
what was the last podcast I listened to? I want to say it was probably a podcast that, again, my fiancée Jen put on when we were on one of our road trips. Uh-huh. So it was probably something from NPR, like Radiolab, or it was. Again, I say probably one of those just because I don't remember.
Well,
I do remember
Radiolab just came out with a new episode that I listened to in the past 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
That literally had me in tears, called Living Room.
Living Room.
It's a rebroadcast, so apparently it was first aired like 15 years ago. But
okay.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Well, I again, just because I'm not a huge podcast listener, nothing kind of comes to mind. But if there were things that I could think of to recommend, again, there was one that I was listening to with Jen that it was an NPR thing where they go over the histories of certain songs.
Right.
And
Song Exploder, maybe?
Something,
No.
Yeah, that may be it. But
Song Exploder looks at how it was created.
Yeah, then that was it.
Yeah.
If that's it, then that was it.
Yeah.
But they did one for Semisonic's song "Closing Time,"
okay,
which is one of those sort of culturally ubiquitous things where you hear it's one of those where you hear the riff and you go, "Oh, okay, I know exactly what's about to happen." But very few people know the story behind it, so I thought that was fascinating.
I'll have to look for that episode. I'll post a link in the website to that episode.
Yeah. Let me think. Other podcasts. Gosh, yeah, not a lot of pods.
That's all right.
And the funny thing is, too, I'm not this, I don't want to pigeonhole this to NPR references, but a good friend of mine.
That's where the quality is.
Well, there's a lot of quality there. At least quality in recording, quality in content, but we won't dive too far into that. I was talking to my good friend Andrew Hund, who he actually has a bike shop here in town.
Yeah, I know Andrew. I've ridden with him for about 20 years. So.
Perfect, sure. Yeah. So I didn't mean to presume there.
Yeah. No.
But
no worries.
He and I were talking, and he mentioned he mentioned a Garrison Keillor quote to me, or at least something he thought it was a Garrison Keillor quote.
Okay.
And I've always loved Garrison Keillor.
Right.
And so if we're just making blanket recommendations here, definitely going to steer people towards A Prairie Home Companion, and specifically my personal favorite, The News from Lake Wobegon.
Yeah, I grew up on it.
Something just about, before I knew what the term ASMR was, I knew that I was a 12-year-old kid in my mom's car listening to the radio late at night and hearing his voice come on and hearing the way that he would speak softly at times and that tenor and that. And it made the space between my ears kind of tingle, and I'm going, "Oh, what's going on here?" And I've always loved that. So, Garrison Keillor.
All right.
And I'm trying to think if I can think of one more off the cuff. Nothing comes to mind necessarily. So, good luck. Good luck to you, podcast listeners.
Yeah. Well, now, when it comes to when you're riding in the city, do you wear earbuds? Do you listen to music, or
I do.
You are listening to what's going on around you?
I'll admit, not in Norfolk, actually, funny enough, but I'll admit to have previously being a headphones while riding guy. And I'm not anymore, and I don't recommend that anybody does, because it really is unsafe, and especially in this city where there are so few protections for cyclists.
Yeah.
And it really does, everybody says, "Oh, the drivers in my city are so terrible. We've got the worst drivers in the world." And I've lived in a few places that have made that claim. I've lived in Jacksonville, Florida. I lived in Chicago.
Right.
Grew up, actually, primarily around Chicago. I've lived in San Diego. I've been to all sorts of cities. I've been all around the United States, been some places around the world. And I really did think, especially when I lived in Southern California, that L.A. was going to be the worst.
Right.
I'd see one accident a week that looked terrible whenever I was coming back from work, and I thought, this is going to be the worst. Norfolk.
Yeah.
Norfolk seems to take it.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. But regardless of the reason why, I can't recommend that anyone ride with headphones in unless maybe you're on a trail or something where you're isolated, and even then maybe you should have them off just so you can be cognizant of what's going on around you. But no headphones on the bike.
No headphones on the bike.
And I would feel irresponsible if I said it was an okay thing to do.
Fair enough. I usually ride with one in. I'll have my left ear out listening to stuff. My right ear, especially when I'm riding the trails in Chesapeake, I'll be listening to a podcast or music. So, but it's also.
I think that's better because you're still saying.
Yeah.
Keeping some of your senses.
I also ride with a rear view mirror.
Okay.
On my helmet. So, what'll happen is I'll catch the sound of a car approaching from behind,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll look in the mirror and I'll assess the situation. I'll be like, oh, they've moved over into the other lane. I'm good. I don't have to worry about it. Or, wow, they're coming up really fast.
Yeah.
And I need to move over and protect myself. So,
and it's primarily that auditory
yeah,
sense that I use to feel safe when I'm riding on the road.
Yeah.
It's almost not even a visual thing.
Yeah.
I don't have rear view mirrors on my bike. Typically, I'll just look over my left shoulder.
Yeah.
And this is bike safety is an interesting thing because like anyone else, or like anything else, I should say, everyone seems to have an opinion.
Yeah.
And I know that some, not all, I'm pretty conventional, but some of my opinions run a little contrary to at least what people around here seem to think is acceptable. I am not a helmet wearer.
Oh.
If we want to start, do we want to dig into that controversy?
We can do it. I get paid to wear a helmet at times. So,
Fair enough.
You know, that was part of the contract. So
fair enough.
Yeah.
Hey, fair enough. I've been paid to wear helmets at other times in my life too. Not bike helmets, but helmets.
Yeah.
One would wonder with me if I should just have a bike helmet on at all times. That would probably be a better argument.
I've heard that argument too. Yeah, no, I posted the bike helmet article in the Bike Norfolk.
I saw that.
Weeks ago. Yeah.
And I very intentionally did not chime in.
And I just felt like I'm just going to put this out there. It's peer-reviewed evidence. You can do with it what you want. Make your own conclusion.
The position I've taken, and this is in part because of the advocacy that I attempt to do as far as cycling is concerned, it also has to do with how I feel personally about helmet wearing.
Right.
And I'll very quickly preface that may change.
Yeah.
You know, let's say that I have a close call one day and I go, nope, the perception of safety is not worth it to me in that sense. Let me throw a helmet on. Or maybe I'm a father sometime in the future and I go, take this either way.
Yeah.
If you are looking at it strictly from a statistical perspective and you're trying to apply that to your behavior, right? You're trying to synthesize information and go, okay, well, but now what do I do with this information? Your biggest threat as a cyclist, particularly in an urban environment, is going to be from vehicles.
Yeah, totally agreed.
So my stance as it exists today is if you're inclined to wear a helmet, by all means, wear a helmet. If you're a kid, so if you're under the guardianship of parents, and they're telling you to, then that's not really an argument either. Wear a helmet, and just from a physiological perspective, from the data we do have, I'd also say that anyone under the age of 14 should wear a helmet. But if you decide not to, or you choose not to, or your preference is not to, the question for me is, would having to wear a helmet, would seeing a helmet as this sort of requisite thing to riding, at least in a casual context, as opposed to something like sport.
Right.
If that would keep you from riding a bike, or even riding a bike more often, don't do it.
Yeah.
And don't get too onto people. Don't become too aggressive with your arguments for those who choose not to and use it as a way almost to gatekeep. Yeah. I've never personally encountered that. Yeah. I've definitely encountered some people who hear me say what I say and then go, oh, well, you're stupid because you don't wear a helmet. Because X, Y, and Z. And they're not wrong in the sense that there are some compelling reasons to do it, and then there's also the presumption of having it versus not having it is a default safer means. Okay, got it. Hear you. At least where I am in my life right now, having to, or at least viewing having to wear a helmet as requisite to riding would keep me off the bike a lot more than it does.
Yeah, that makes
sense.
Or
a lot more than I do anyway. I'd probably ride maybe 50% less. Because it is a hindrance, and if you look to other places in the world where cycling infrastructure is more as it should be, or where cycling is more ingrained in culture, or you just see a greater segregation between cyclists and pedestrians and motor vehicles.
Yeah.
The helmet thing, and it is, I'm doing air quotes here, the helmet air quote thing isn't a thing.
Right.
So it's a part of our discourse. It's another one of those very American things, and that's cool and it's fine, but that's where I'm at on it. So.
Yeah. No, I haven't broken a helmet in probably a decade. So I think the last time it was this freak accident, single rider accident. But I was riding to East Coast Bikes for the 8 a.m. Saturday morning ride, and I was running a little bit behind schedule, but I knew I was coming down the street so I could catch them. So I was riding as fast as I could under the railroad tracks.
Mm-hmm. Was that on Collie?
On Collie.
Yeah.
And when I got to the very bottom into the shadow of the tracks, a pigeon was standing in the middle of the road, got scared, and flew up into me and smacked my shoulder.
Wow.
Smacked me so hard that my arm jerked, my front wheel jerked, and I crashed.
Wow.
And cracked my helmet and got some good road rash out of it. So I ended up with a...
We really need pigeon control around here, don't we?
A beak-shaped bruise on my shoulder from this pigeon. But if I hadn't been wearing the helmet in that instance, I'd probably been looking at some brain trauma.
Yeah.
So but that was the last time I cracked a helmet. So it's...
Admittedly, I'm starting to shift a little bit on this and just how I feel personally.
Right.
I'm starting to think, maybe I should, because the last thing I need is a Murphy's Law situation.
Right.
You can have all these statistics and all these studies that say, oh, well, if you're wearing a helmet riding a bike, you might as well be wearing a helmet when you're walking around town.
Right.
Because statistically, the chances are about the same.
Yeah.
Or maybe we should all be wearing helmets when we drive, if we drive, right? That's great.
Yeah.
But one of the most difficult things to do is to take data and, again, synthesize it into actions that you can justify in your own life.
Right.
When we were on that social cycling ride where my mom was, I was behind her and we were taking a corner really right towards the very end of the ride when we were in Portsmouth. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why she did, but my mom just kind of clipped the curb a little bit as she took a corner, and she fell. She was wearing a helmet. She didn't hit her head. She just kind of sort of landed awkwardly in a little grassy patch, and I go over and I go to help her. But things like that, or just the sort of Murphy's Law situation where you go, the chances could be extremely low.
Right.
But if they're going to happen to anybody, it's probably going to be me, and I would hate for that to be the situation. So I think I'm softening, as it were, and will probably look to buy one this year. But I'll still maintain that to anyone who chooses not to, I think it's improper to make them feel bad about that choice.
I think you're right. Yeah. All right. Let's call it a
All
day.
Right. Wesley, this has been fantastic.
Thank
you
so
for
much,
having
man.
me.
I appreciate you having in here. All right. Cool.
I really like that. It was great.
Yeah. Me and Garrison down by the lakeside. Normally, if a guest on Tell Me About Your Bike references a creator, I post a link to their work in the podcast show notes. In case he talked about how much he enjoyed Garrison Keillor on the Prairie Home Companion. But Garrison is different. My relationship with him is more conflicted. I'm not linking to the Minnesota Public Radio archives of a Prairie Home Companion. If you want to listen to Garrison, you'll have to Google it for yourself. I grew up listening to Garrison Keillor's Prairie Home Companion on National Public Radio. He was a beatific father figure for me. Saturday evenings were defined by the news from Lake Wobegon. I listened to Garrison while my own father was absent, away at pastor parish meetings or in his office preparing sermons. I identified with Garrison's on-air alter ego, the tortured artist and perpetual student Carson Weiler. As my own voice deepened, I imitated Garrison's rich baritone tones. I laughed at his penguin jokes. Garrison was borderline autistic, as was I. Garrison could do no wrong in my eyes and ears. My favorite aunt would send me cassette tape copies of his Christmas albums. I devoured Garrison's books. I won an essay contest in junior high with a fantasy wherein I met Garrison. My family subscribed to the Prairie Home Companion gift catalog and dreamed of seeing a Prairie Home Companion live. One date night in the mid-aughts, I took my second wife to see Garrison's traveling Christmas show, and we joyfully sang carols along with him in an audience of thousands. That all changed for me in November 2017, the year of Me Too. In an article entitled, "For Some Who Lived It, Keeler's World Wasn't So Funny," Minnesota Public Radio made public what had been rumored in private for years. Garrison Keeler had been sexually harassing female colleagues, inappropriately touching them, and trying to buy their silence with payouts. He denigrated female writers and refused to feature them on his daily show, The Writer's Almanac. Garrison, it seemed, was little better than Donald Trump or Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby, some of the other misogynists brought low that year. My idol had been dethroned. My partner at the time had little sympathy for me, as her best friend had been dissuaded in the 90s from interning at a Prairie Home Companion because of the rumors of how Garrison treated his female staff. She saw Garrison as just another jerk who got his just rewards. I felt like I had lost my artistic father. I could have just deleted my guest Corey's reference to Garrison Keeler and never published it in this podcast, but I feel compelled to wrestle with Garrison's legacy. I've canceled other troublesome artists in my life. To this day, I cannot hear a Michael Jackson song without thinking of him molesting young boys. Regardless of how enchanting Harry Potter is, and regardless of how much I enjoyed sharing the books and movies with my children as they grew up, I still find myself constantly reminded of the vile, hateful things J.K. Rowling has repeatedly said about trans women. I can remember verbatim punchlines from Bill Cosby's comedy albums that I checked out from the library as a young boy in a small town in Vermont 40 years ago, but I no longer laugh when I remember Bill Cosby's jokes on those mono LPs from the 60s about secretly dosing women with aphrodisiacs. Jokes about Spanish Fly getting girls in the mood just don't seem so funny when you've learned that Bill Cosby routinely drugged and raped women. So maybe that's why I've canceled Garrison Keeler too. Garrison Keeler was a funny man. He was also an asshole. He was a gifted writer and performer. He was also a misogynist. He made millions laugh. He made dozens cry. He used his power and authority to assault women physically and verbally. While he was the soundtrack of my youth, I can no longer abide hearing his voice. Goodbye, Garrison. Thanks for listening to another episode of Tell Me About Your Bike. Please like and review the show on your preferred podcasting platform. It helps get the word out to other riders. If there's someone in your life who rides a bike, pass the show on to them. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting Tell Me About Your Bike on Patreon. There's a link in the show notes. Patrons will get a limited edition Tell Me About Your Bike sticker perfect for your water bottle. We've got exclusive content coming for patrons soon. Podcasts make the perfect gift for the special someone in your life. If you mention Tell Me About Your Bike, you'll get a free hosting for a custom podcast. I'll interview family and friends and put together an audio greeting card that will be cherished for years to come. Look for the link in the show notes. So keep on rolling, keep the rubber side down. Cheers, y'all. This podcast, copyright 2024, Rambling Ukulele Productions.